Despite the danger and pervasiveness of stalking, it is a crime that is underreported. Some victims do not know a crime has occurred. Some believe that reporting to law enforcement will not stop the stalking. And unfortunately, the last belief is not unfounded. In most cases, reporting stalking to law enforcement does not stop the behavior due to the high rates of reoffending among stalkers. The first interaction between law enforcement and the victim is a critical encounter. It can help determine whether the victim will continue to work with the criminal justice system or seek additional resources. To understand the crucial steps in recognizing and responding to stalking, we'll hear from various arms of the criminal justice system. I will venture a bet that in every community, large or small in this country, there is far more stalking going on than we are at all aware of.
Law enforcement have to be well trained so that they listen to indicators of stalking, they follow up with appropriate questions, they recognize that victims of stalking are experiencing trauma and that may impact their responses.
If you just go one time and look at one event, you don't have stalking. Instead, you have to look at the history. What else has been going on here? What is the precursors to what happened tonight?
Basically, understanding dynamics of what constitutes stalking, understanding dynamics of what is going on in the victim's life.
In and of itself, many of the behaviors that are going to occur with stalking, we need to understand and recognize are in and of themselves not criminal.
The conduct itself may seem benign without the context of the victim and the victim living it.
Key and foremost is listening. We have to create a connection, a bond with that victim so that we can understand from their perspective what that situation is.
There are common acts that stalkers engage in. The types of things that stalkers do, they almost do universally. Recognize that that's the type of behavior that a stalker would engage in, and then ask the appropriate questions. Oftentimes, a stalker will start with the type of approach that is designed to elicit a positive response from the victim. I want the victim to be in my control. I want the victim to engage with me. Now he's sitting outside in the parking lot while, she's inside the house, or he's outside her window taking pictures of her through her bedroom window on his phone, and those things that are very obviously criminal. But then we want to back up and we want to take the time to look at, well, what was happening before that? Because that strengthens our stalking investigation.
We need to take the criminal act that has occurred and understand our state laws so that when a person is talking to us and they begin to give us elements of stalking, that we connect the dots, that we put it together, and that we don't only charge for the criminal act that we may be initially responding to, but we also charge for stalking.
There's often an intersection between stalking and other crimes, whether they're property crimes, whether they're crimes of a sexual nature, whether they're domestic violence crimes, that there's often other crimes that are occurring while that stalking behavior is being perpetrated.
We have to begin to look at the totality of the circumstances. And in collecting, investigating, and corroborating the range of kind of experiences of that victim, we can now piece together a total picture that ultimately speaks to the real implications of this crime.
It was a breakup. Then it was text messages. Then it was emails because she blocked his text messages. He switched to emails. Blocked his emails. He switched to social media. Blocked his social media. Now he's following her. He's looking for her. He found her. He leaves the cards. He leaves the flowers. And then we have to make that leap to, well, now her tires have been slashed, or now her windshield's been broken in.
Connecting, thinking about context, asking questions that brings that out in victims will help us automatically create a deeper bond and a partnership that can result in success.
One of the things that's really unique about stalking is it does vary greatly from state to state.
It becomes important to recognize the laws, what the elements of the crime of stalking is in your community.
We have to establish that the element that some type of fear has occurred. You have to make sure that you include in your report the fear that this victim sensed, or the intimidation, or the harassment. And you have to make sure that you put that in your report very descriptively so that we can ensure good prosecution.
Because fear and substantial emotional distress, elements of stalking, are so subjective, it's often law enforcement's responsibility and role to be able to extract that from a victim with a good interview and with good follow-up questions. So if somebody comes forward and reports to law enforcement, my car got damaged, my tires got slashed, somebody keyed my car, they keyed a swear word into the side of my car. Law enforcement needs to recognize that that's the type of behavior that a stalker would engage in, and then ask the appropriate questions. Do you have anybody that you're currently having problems with? Is there anyone that you've tried to end contact with?
Has the person that is stalking you been subject to a protection order or some other restrictive order issued by the courts? Any other behaviors transpired prior to that they've never reported?
And those are exactly the kind of things that either may be lost when they initially come to report the crime and nobody writes it down, and so they may walk away thinking that what they've just reported doesn't matter.
The officers that are responding to it need to ensure that they absorb all that information and then report it.
I want our sergeants and I want our lieutenants to be looking at these reports and ensuring that when they read the elements or the description of that crime, did we miss stalking or potentially miss stalking?
When responding to a crime and you begin to believe that stalking has occurred, then you begin to conduct your threat assessment.
We need to make sure that we're thinking about their safety as a key and critical component of our first response.
So when we're talking with victims of stalking, we want to be looking for things that tell us that this particular perpetrator at this particular time is higher risk. If there has been, phone calls, and then he's sitting outside of her house, that tells us there's a spike in his ability to have direct contact with her. Once you have that escalation, you can see that this pattern is increasing in severity and frequency.
The officer should also conduct in looking into the perpetrator. Number one risk factor for lethality is going to be their protection order. And not only just a protection order, but have they had violations of protection orders?
A protective order gets filed, or there's something that he gets a notice to stay away from her workplace, or there's some type of additional action that happens, that risk might change.
And we know that primarily based on the studies and based on my understanding of stalking over the last 10 years, that majority of stalkers are intimate partners or ex-spouses.
So some of the things we want to be looking for are particularly offenders where there is prior physical violence. So someone who is an intimate partner with their victim in the past and there has been violence in that relationship.
Not only can the information from these threat and risk assessments help inform us, but it can help inform the entire system, advocates, prosecutors, the courts.
And when we're working with stalking victims, because it is a longer investigation, we have to reevaluate their risk throughout that process.
If you don't have a threat assessment in your jurisdiction, then refer them to the persons that will do that, such as your victim advocates.
You want to make sure that the victim has a safety plan and that it is being assessed with someone who is there particularly to support this victim.
Stalkers pose a risk to people's safety, period. And if a victim is not told that, if they're not told this is potentially dangerous, they may not partner with law enforcement long term.
We need victims to understand the reality of what we may require of them, and that we need to help build a partnership with them. Because many of these cases may require their ongoing engagement and involvement in order to be successful.
It's really important when asking victims to chronicle events that are occurring in their lives to constitute stalking, is that we also ensure that they preserve whatever evidence they have already received, such as text messages, unwanted phone calls, things that are sent via email, photographs.
The first opportunity you have to capture that evidence, capture it. Don't tell a victim, well, go down to station tomorrow and have your phone photographed. No, photograph it right now. You're here with her now, photograph it now.
You will probably then document that report. After you've received all evidence that you can on scene, then I would like to leave the victim with a log. And this is for future occurrences, things that may occur after the fact.
That may be things like logging the number of calls they receive, logging the number of times that offender drives past their home or blows the horn or does whatever it may be. We need to help victims understand the key and critical importance of securing all digital evidence that helps build and support our case and our investigation.
Just taking a screenshot, emailing it to yourself, just making sure that it's captured in more than one means, so that if the device gets damaged for some reason, you still have that backup.
And I think that it's very understandable to just want to erase it and just be done with it.
Get a victim to understand it's all important. It's all important. Don't leave any of it out for me. Oftentimes victims will negotiate with their stalkers, and then they'll sanitize that because they don't want you to be upset as a police officer. So getting that relationship with a victim to the point where they understand you're not judging them, you're not criticizing them.
The trust in the relationship is incredibly important, also because things will happen during the delay of a trial. Additional evidence or additional activity may come up that can be added to the charges or will be the basis for new charges.
What becomes imperative is that when we have cases that cross our jurisdictional boundaries, that we reach out to whomever in that other agency is going to help us to effectively respond to this case, because it may require a co-investigation.
Law enforcement usually stops at that boundary, but I'll tell you right now, the stalker doesn't.
But one of the things that happens a lot is that people commit crimes of stalking in other jurisdictions, and they primarily do the same things. This is that type of crime that just kind of get washed if we don't work together with other jurisdictions.
Being able to communicate easily with our partners across the United States and sometimes globally is very important to be able to effectively doing these cases. Everyone's experience is an opportunity to communicate and to teach one another, to help, raise each other's capacity about topics that are very relevant to the effective investigation and prosecution of stalking.
We know that sometimes prosecutors will administrative release or drop cases, and the only way law enforcement can find out how or why is to go and have that conversation with our prosecutors. That conversation is so vitally important.
We need to understand what it is that they seek from us in our investigation, what they believe constitutes a full and complete investigation.
It may be an opportunity for law enforcement to educate the prosecutor into how evidence is gathered and maintained and the different parts of the procedure.
When you're all on the same page, a lot more of the information is going to come around and around and around, and it's going to make a stronger case.
becomes important that we know what the available resources are in our communities.
The partnership between officers and victim advocates is vitally important because eventually our victims are going to go to them and they're going to receive information from the victims that may aid us additionally down the road in our investigation.
And they can also just provide key and important help in developing a good, sound, solid safety plan, which we know is immensely important for many of these victims and their ongoing involvement with our cases.
You start partnering with them more often, what you realize is it's the right thing to do for a victim. Partnering with victim services is the right thing to do for a victim. Because there are things that a victim will need that law enforcement can't provide.
In the agency where I come from, we had to make sure that we communicated that this was an important crime for our officers to investigate.
And it lets stalkers know we're not going to let this happen in our community, that we take this very serious, that we have a victim-based response, that we intend to hold offenders accountable.
Where policies and protocols don't exist, we still have to make sure we're acting. We can't have inaction while we're waiting for the perfect law, the perfect protocol, the perfect policy. We need to implement what we have now.
Training law enforcement to recognize what stalking is, what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it smells like, so that when they're out in the field and they're having contact with victims, it's not the victim's job to recognize that this is a stalking crime. Stalking is a crime.
We have to be willing to go back and look at what we did well and the times when perhaps our response did not rise to the level it should have.
You know, just continuing to educate yourself on this crime. It is always evolving, and making sure that you're up to speed on everything, on the legal investigative issues that you need to have.
It's in your community. It's absolutely in your community. And if you haven't been trained to look for it, to recognize how prevalent it is, and identify the signs of it, you're going to miss it.
With regard to the crime of stalking, it becomes important that we are not part of the problem that results in the continuation of this very serious and insidious crime that's affecting many in our communities.